This week, we were transported back to the Balkans.
The city was ruled by Serb snipers, yes, John tells the court. But there was another kind of sniper who seemed different from the rest. He saw them roaming the streets of the city on multiple occasions, and they stood out. Firstly, their clothes. They wore a sort of civilian military combination. Secondly, their guns. They carried enormous, unusual weapons that looked better suited to, quote, hunting boar in the Black Forest than in urban combat in the Balkans.
Okay, so that's Hala Mohideen hosting a video for Al Jazeera English called, Jamie, The Human Hunters of Sarajevo. You can watch the whole thing on their YouTube channel. Tell us what's been happening this week.
So this week, prosecutors in Milan, Italy, have opened an investigation into alleged sniper tourism during the Sarajevo siege. So the allegation is that foreign nationals, most immediately Italians, but there are thoughts that there were others from around Europe, paid large sums, somewhere in the region between 80,000 to 100,000 euros, to Bosnian Serb forces so they could be transported to sniper positions overlooking Sarajevo and shoot at civilians effectively for sport.
I mean, it's hard to know what reaction to say to that, apart from WTF. Was there an inclination before that anything like sniper tourism had or could happen in any war in the 20th century?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting for me because my dad actually worked in Sarajevo and Mostar during the war for the UN. And when he told me stories about it, it was actually one of the stories that he told quite regularly were about kind of drunk stag doos from around the Balkans who would go and would basically pay to go and take part in the war, basically. So I kind of knew this was something that existed. So I was quite surprised when it came up as news this week. But I guess this in detail is because there was a documentary an Italian guy did 3 years ago, the Sarajevo Safari film, which kind of triggered renewed interest in this. And then this Milan journalist, Enzio Gavazzini, he then compiled a complaint, and that's got to the Milan's prosecutor's office. So I guess with this kind of thing, there might have been a lot of knowledge of it, but until you get the kind of scene written out, I mean, and some of the details of it are absolutely horrendous. You know, there was a kind of notion within this, the allegations put together for the prosecutor's office, there was a notions that there was a price list, so you could pay more to shoot children, and then if you wanted to shoot adult men, especially in uniform, and then women, whereas older people might be cheaper or free. And then you also look at the kind of logistical route that they went through. The allegations are that particularly Italians would go through from meeting in Trieste and then pretend that they were on humanitarian missions. Like I say, I mean, we've talked about war tourism before, I guess, but that's always been mercenaries. This is something much more horrific, which is civilians basically going and hunting for sport.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely horrendous in principle. I suppose you start thinking, Harriet, whether it is so different maybe from people who volunteer to join wars that otherwise they wouldn't be part of. What are the motivations of people who go out there as mercenaries to places like Ukraine, for example? Sometimes, I suppose, it is about getting your hands on a gun. So is that so different to, as brazenly as this, allegedly paying just to shoot someone?
That's a really good question that I haven't got the answer to, except to say that it feels different, that there is, I think, a difference somehow between joining a war and fighting and taking a lot of risk, personal risk yourself, whether that's for money or ideological or national reasons, versus what the allegations are here, which is tourism that you wouldn't risk yourself. The allegations are that these tourists were placed on the mountains around Sarajevo, because Sarajevo is kind of in a basin within all these mountains. And the allegation is that they would be posted in these mountains and shooting down with sniper rifles purely for the purposes of thrill or tourism or some sort of sadistic impulse. And there were similar allegations made during the civil war in Lebanon between the 70s and the 90s, that when Beirut was separated into two halves and there was this no man's land in between, the allegation was that tourist shooters was the expression, that they would come and participate in that way. But it feels different.
No, I think that is a good distinction. Yes, they weren't putting themselves at risk. And also, Felicity, they were shooting civilians. I mean, I suppose the point is that the army that they were joining was also shooting civilians, but nonetheless, that's different maybe to joining an army and shooting members of an opposing army.
I think it has to be different. I mean, this is so sadistic. It's for pleasure. Sometimes they were shooting at people in uniforms, but other times it was civilians, other times it was children. I think one of the most moving cases was the Romeo and Juliet of Sarajevo. It was a couple who was shot by snipers on a bridge, and their bodies lay there for 4 days before anyone can get to them. And at the time, I think it, made headlines just because it was just so awful and so moving. But there were also reports of children being shot, a small child who was holding onto his mother's hand. I mean, just like the absolute worst of humanity depicted in the story. And when I was doing the research and looking at all the articles come with images of ordinary people like grimacing, cowering away from these snipers, and some Bosnian shooters trying to fire back, but just the sheer kind of terror and just being hunted by fellow humans. It's just, I haven't seen a story like this for such a long time. And for ages there have been rumours, and it's almost like a kind of urban legend or myth or something that everyone was not everyone was talking about, but there were definitely rumours, and it seemed
people who
like
were there suspected.
Yeah, that was suspected. There were eyewitnesses. It kind of seemed plausible, but now hopefully the momentum is building, that there is real hard evidence coming to light, and maybe some justice can be sought.
I mean, just to be clear, actually, Jamie, when you said what your dad had reported to you anecdotally, was he talking about people joining as snipers on stag groups, or was he talking about in another capacity turning up to witness or support the army?
I think both. So it was kind of fairly well known that, because I think, and this is what Felicity was saying, which I think was so crucial to discussing the Balkan War, is that it was one of the first wars to be televised, like 24/7, to have news outlets that were showing in the nightly news things that would happen that day. Talking to my dad and his friends, some of whom still live in the former Yugoslavia, they would be shown on TV exactly the kind of ease with which people were getting killed in Sarajevo if you were on the Serbian side. It was kind of seen as something that was done, that was without risk, I think he was saying, that so people could go get drunk on a weekend, go and be given guns, fight for a bit, come back. I think that the really shocking thing about it is that perhaps we don't know the scale of people that were involved outside of maybe the former Yugoslavia, because my understanding with my dad was that these were maybe Serbians that weren't involved in the military. Obviously, this prosecution is about Italians, but there is also talk of other Europeans that would fly over. It doesn't stretch the imagination to realize that once some people had this, sadistic urge or pleasure, it could spread quite easily. But I think the 24/7 news angle is something that's really important, particularly about the Balkans, because it just did show people exactly what was going on. And that's the really scary thing about the 4 years that Sarajevo was in the siege, was that we in the UK couldn't hide behind not knowing what was going on. And we in the UK took real deliberate decisions not to get involved. And if you go to Sarajevo, which I would really recommend, Bosnia is one of the best countries I've ever visited, and with some of the most beautiful people in the world. And they really do feel let down by the United Nations and by the West, more generally, because for 4 years there was a siege taking place, and people got the video, they got the images, and they didn't do anything. One of the things that was so shocking, for the UK at least, was that these people did unfortunately look quite like us, and it was close to us in the same way that we talk about Ukraine at the same time. And for a number of reasons, the government didn't decide to step in, and the UN didn't do enough. So there's maybe that will come up more and more, with this stuff. If this story continues, maybe we'll have to relook at our role and the role of the West in the Sarajevo siege, which I think is worth doing.
Yeah, 11,000 plus people died in that siege. And thank you for bringing it to us, because it gives us the opportunity to look at it and look at some of the history. I mean, Harriet, were you surprised by anything you learnt looking into the background of this war? It isn't much talked about. I realise listeners in Croatia or Bosnia would disagree with me, but in Britain, we don't talk about what happened very much over there.
Yeah, no, there was this book that came out by this Italian journalist, Luca Leone, in 2014 about this. So this has been kind of rumbling along in the background. But what I think is really important to talk about is that the war in Bosnia might have ended, but the conflict certainly hasn't. Bosnia is still incredibly divided along ethnic and national and political lines. Like, after the war ended, and this was the worst violence since World War II. I mean, 100,000 people, millions of people displaced in this war in the 1990s. Like, this is in my lifetime. and the peace accord that ended the war, it did stop the killing, but it just froze the conflict by splitting the country into two halves. So at the moment, you've got the Serbian Republic, which is like the autonomous Bosnian Serbian region, and the Federation of Bosnian Muslims and Croats. So you've got like Muslim Bosnians and Catholic Croats on one side and Orthodox Serbs on the other. So ethnic lines, national lines, religious lines. And the problem is that kind of stopped Bosnia developing into like a functional state. And things have been getting really tense all year, like this intense nationalism. And the president of the Bosnian Serb entity was sentenced to a year in prison for separatism. And he denies the Srebrenica genocide. He says that Bosnia has ceased to exist. He openly discusses the possibility of succeeding. He's like a major ally of Putin, backed by Hungary, backed by Serbia. So the EU and the UN, yes, there is an EU peacekeeping force there, but Bosnia is still a major flashpoint, and we can still say that the West isn't doing enough, even though Bosnia was given candidate status for EU membership a few years ago. The EU saying, well, it can't become an EU member until it does this, this, and this, all of this reform, all of this, like bring together its fragmented landscape, but it actually can't do that because of the Serbian region and the separatism that is backed by Russia and kind of now China as well, but there's a lot of Russian money going into training them all. So I think a real key takeaway here is that this conflict in Bosnia, the war might have ended, but the conflict is still ongoing and the West is still looking away from it.
Yeah, there's also been a sort of patchy record, I guess, on bringing some of these war criminals to justice. Felicity, how likely do you think it is that those involved in this, if it is proven these allegations of sniper tourism, will be brought to justice?
Well, like you say, on the one hand, it has taken such a long time for any of the perpetrators to be brought to justice. Radovan Karadzic, the former Bosnian Serb leader, was found guilty of genocide and other crimes against humanity in 2016. So that was a hell of a long time after the offences he committed. And also, you know, some of the perpetrators are still active in political life in Serbia. And what's more, they're regarded as heroes. Some of them are mentioned in school textbooks, in history books. Even when you look at this story, like a lot of Serbs are like outraged at the story and deny that it's true. And, you know, they see the conflict in a completely different way from, you know, how we're talking about it. To date, not one of these snipers has been brought to justice. So there's that to bear in mind. And also, I think up until now, you know, this kind of hearsay, do we know the numbers? Do we have the dates? That sort of thing would have made it seem more unlikely that they wouldn't be brought to justice. However, on the other hand, a lawyer who was working with Gavazzini said that the evidence accumulated after such a long investigation is well substantiated, that identities have been made and individuals will be questioned. So it sounds like it has taken all this time and kind of meticulous and painstaking investigation to be in a position where they can actually go to individuals and try and get the evidence they need, rather than it just being sort of, you know, a few rumours. So it depends what the strength of their evidence is. I mean, they've got to get it right. I mean, it would be awful to wrongly accuse someone of what we're talking about. It's absolutely horrific, and it wouldn't do anything for tensions in the region to get this wrong. But it sounds as though the lawyers and journalists working on this are sort of quietly confident that they have now amassed the evidence they need.
And if that's right, then, Jamie, do you predict that it will spread to other nationalities who might have taken part in this? What do you think will happen next in this situation and for Bosnia more generally?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to say. I mean, it's worth saying, obviously, as I think I did earlier, is that at the moment it does seem to be just the Italian prosecutors that are the ones that are bringing it together, and there hasn't been actual, you know, we're only looking at one, the kind of initial starting point for the prosecution. You can't say other nationalities, but I think while this tension exists in the Serbian Republic of Bosnia, a lot of the war crimes, a lot of the cases will continue to go unsolved. A lot of the people who are alleged to be involved are kind of living with impunity in the Serbian Republic, and because of the fear of the repercussions and the kind of taking sides, you know, Russians backing, you know, Orban is a big backer of the Serbian Republic in Bosnia. Because of this kind of like taking sides angle, people don't want to kind of ruffle feathers, which is, I mean, really sad, because as we know, with all of the things, like all of the war crimes and the stuff that we talk about on this podcast, quite a lot of it is that until a country, you know, gets justice, until victims feel like they're heard, they can't move on. if you go to Bosnia, a lot of people will say that they haven't moved on from what's happened. It's less than 30 years in some cases from some of the atrocities. And if there isn't justice and the people aren't brought to justice, and not only that, but like Felicity was saying, they are involved in military and seen as heroes in some parts of the country, it's really hard to see how the country moves forward, and that's a real worry and concern.